Aloha and welcome to the Solar Coaster live show here for Hawaii Energy Conference 2021. Very fortunate to have Jenny Potter of the Hawaii Public Utilities Commission with us. How are you today, Jenny?
I'm doing very well, Josh. How are you doing?
Excellent. So excited to talk to you and so excited to learn all about these great acronyms that I'm learning about here. PBR, performance-based regulation, PIM, performance incentive mechanisms. What is all this about?
It's exciting. It's a really exciting stuff. I'd like to thank you for having me. Thanks for allowing me to share the information and the progress that's happening at the Commission within the state of Hawaii. I think the rest of the nation is watching how we are evolving the utility business model, and that we're doing that through performance-based regulation. And so we're really taking the lead, and it's a remarkable process that we've been through over the last several years with a tremendous number of stakeholders that have contributed substantial amounts of information into the record that's helped us get to where we are today. So it's really been a village that has helped us build this exemplary sort of framework for how to proceed into the 21st and 22nd century, if you will, and move away from the regulatory compact that's been in place for over 100 years to this new regime that will be evaluating the companies based on their performance rather than, looking at the capital expenditures and the revenues that they earn. So it's a pretty big paradigm shift for them, and we're going to be doing it sort of incrementally. But really, what the idea is behind PBR is to get away from cost of service regulation. How they make money is by spending money and then and their revenues. And now we're looking at performance. And so really managing to performance rather than managing to cost recovery. So really great concept. And we're excited to see how we can unfold this over the next 5 years. So this will be a 5-year term that we have for the first phase of the performance-based regulation. So it'll be an interesting transition that we begin on June 1st.
June 1st, right around the corner, days away, actually.
Days away.
I can see how this shift to performance-based regulation is such a key component to the adoption of renewable energies, and then being able to usher this in a healthy way that we can measure and kind of improve along the way. So we talk about this phrase, what gets measured gets improved, right? So what exactly is it that we're measuring in this new regime?
So there's a couple of components to that. I think the first that I'd like to touch on is the revenue mechanisms that we've identified. So we have really two parts to the performance-based regulation. One is the revenue mechanisms, and then we have the performance-based mechanism. So those two components together really compile opportunities for the companies to earn even above and beyond what they would in a cost of service model, but it does require that they perform exemplary. So in the regime under the revenue mechanisms, we're really looking for cost control. So we've identified the first take is what we wanted to see was day one savings for consumers. So all of the customers in the HECO territory from the day that this begins should see a reduction in their electricity bill. Wow. And so we did that through an incentive or a mechanism called a consumer dividend. And that consumer dividend will progress throughout the 5-year period. So the companies automatically have what's called their revenue requirement reduced by this customer dividend amount. And so immediately out of the gate, it's saying companies control your O&M and your overhead, and therefore you'll be able to make money. On the other side of this is the performance incentive mechanisms, and that's really where the measurement gets done. We have scorecards, we have metrics, we have PIMs that actually reward exemplary behavior, and that's where I think the rubber hits the road when you think about performance-based regulation. So in the case of of looking at what happens over, most of our PIMs are actually designed for about 3 years, and then they'll be reevaluated at that time to ensure that they're actually working. So we'll be collecting data, we'll be evaluating the performance and measuring that against what benchmarks we've set and thresholds we've developed within those, for each of those incentive mechanisms. And then we'll determine, you know, after a 3-year period, if that's been successful. That said, the companies do get paid on an annual basis. So it's not like they have to wait 3 years in order to get that financial compensation for exemplary performance.
Right, right. Thank you for that. And, you know, as you describe this focus in on really lowering electric bills, when I talk to my friends that know we're in the energy space and we talk about all this technology and all this regulation, and they say, Josh, I just want a lower electric bill. You know,
That's
so
right.
that's really what it comes down to. Is this going to
Absolutely.
happen? They're almost at a point where they just kind of tell me that's going to happen, you know? And so to hear that from you is so just fundamentally exciting to know that that's right around the corner. And, you know, that being said, so we have this, I want to understand a little bit better about how we balance these financial metrics that are so important with overall societal goals, reduction of carbon, for example, and things of that nature.
Yeah, that's great. So I think one of the biggest ones that we have playing out and that we've incentivized is that, and it was not even a controversy at all among the parties that were participating in this proceeding. So, you know, we had about 8 parties that all agreed that an accelerated renewable portfolio standard would be an ideal performance incentive mechanism. And so the companies are basically being paid, you know, an X amount of dollars. I'm not going to disclose that, but if people read the order. So, but they're being paid to really accelerate renewable adoption, which will also further decarbonization, because we won't have as much fossil fuel online in order to deliver those services that are being delivered by renewable projects. So that's a big one. I mean, and the faster that they develop these and they get them on the ground, the greater the reward. They already have penalties associated with not meeting milestones that are imposed by the state, but this is the reward. We're offering a carrot in this sense in order for them to improve that.
Gotcha.
And so that's one example.
Well, let me ask this question. So if the legislature passes new laws that require more emphasis on decarbonization, for example, how will the PIMs change?
Kind of a tricky one. I think in terms of you know, new laws that would encourage things like greenhouse gas and decarbonization more aggressively than now, we have scorecards and metrics that we could elevate into actual PIMs. So we have tried to design the framework so that it does allow us to collect data for several years and then potentially elevate them into a financial opportunity. The greenhouse gas one was one that we kicked around whether it should be a PIM or not, but also that ultimately felt that in order to measure you know, full life cycle, and we needed more data in order to do that. So that'll be one. But in terms of the legislators, if they decide that, you know, that there needs to be some substantial change to the framework, or you know, that is not working, you know, and they decide to pass a law, then it would certainly override the existing law that they have given, you know, the jurisdiction that they have given to us. But at this point, we don't want to change what we are doing. You know, like you set this framework in place and you want to see how it works. So it's not, this isn't a test bed, if you will, but it's something that you don't want to tinker with too much, because you want to ensure that the utility can be successful,
Right.
and that it's successful for society as well. So
That's great. You know, and then where we're talking about the ledge, we're talking about the utility. We think of it as a description of Hawaii. Is KIUC and Hawaiian Electric, are they both subject to the PBR in the same way?
no, they're not. They aren't, because the utility on Kauai is a co-op, and it has its own board of directors that oversees the majority of their purchasing and, and some of their goals and requirements, and even sets, measurable metrics and scorecards for them, that they do a really good job of managing that utility. And that's not to say that HECO isn't well managed either, but it's just that we don't have as much, we don't interact as much with KIUC because of the way that the co-op is structured. So yeah, they're not subject to it.
Okay, understood. Thank you for that. Well, let's okay, so we're talking really about Oahu, Hawaii Island, Maui, and everywhere outside of Kauai, where the KIUC is the co-op that we just talked about. So let's get a sense of timing here. When will we know if this is a success? You mentioned 3 years. Are we going to get that evaluation on an annual basis? Is it going to be 3 years down the road? Are you going to be quarterly updates? How's it going to flesh out?
So what we've asked first and foremost from the utilities to build a platform and a web page. They already actually have an existing platform there where they show, their performance on several metrics, and those were not quite sufficient for where we're going in this new regime. So we've asked them to enhance that. And a lot of the metrics in there will be reported, a lot of the metrics from the PBR regime will be reported on their website on a quarterly, biannual, and annual basis. And so we'll be able to see, what changes are occurring over time. But we will get annual check-ins from them. They'll do annual reporting in order to sort of true up, and then also for us to evaluate their performance on the PIMs, and that in order for a payout or basically an adjustment to the revenue mechanisms.
I see. So we're going to be able to see it, maybe not quite real time, but regular updates, and that'll be
Absolutely
available. Do you think it'll be interpretable and understandable for us regular folks when we look at it?
We'll make sure of it.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about decoupling, because that's a word we hear a lot about. What is the connection between decoupling and PBR?
So it is going to be a component of PBR, and there's many reasons for that. Obviously, Hawaii is just a leader in rooftop solar adoption, and so that just eats into the bottom line, and we do not want to discourage the utility from expediting those types of projects. So, and then in addition to energy efficiency, so it plays an important role in the PBR regime, as even though it's still very closely attached to a cost of service model. So it's something that what I like to say is that cost of service is going to be a very long and difficult breakup between the utility and the regulator, and just because it's just no one's really done it before, not to the degree.
Well, what about acts of God? Can like, for example, in California, can wildfire, or even here, of course, can wildfire risk be addressed in PBR, or are some risks still considered act of God? I mean, is it the right place to handle that?
Yeah, actually, we have it's what's called the Z factor. We have an actual algorithm that we use in order to calculate the revenue mechanisms. And the Z factor is designed exactly for that. If there are hurricanes, if there's fires, if there's any type of act of God, if you will, or even potentially, a cybersecurity type issue where there was an outage on the grid and things needed to be replaced, or so those are all components that would be covered under the Z factor after careful review, of course, from the commission to ensure that the cost would be prudent.
Understood. Thank you for that. Well, what about different islands, right? So does PBR allow island by island differences? Do, for example, will Molokai PIMs look different than Oahu PIMs? How is that broken out?
It's an excellent question. We haven't gotten to that level of granularity. What we did determine was that the split between Oahu is about 70% of the energy is consumed on Oahu, 15% on Maui, and 15% on Hawaii Island. And so we broke the PIMs up in that order. And Maui would include Molokai and Lanai. So that would be it would be treated as the MECO territory. So that's how we delegated sort of the incentives among the different companies, and but it's not going to be, even though there would be a lot of benefit to having explicit PIMs that were specific to each island, because they each are so different and unique and have challenges that should be addressed, you know, and could be expeditiously if perhaps they were incentivized. So
Okay, I understand. All right. Well, what about, it occurs to me that this is a pretty sophisticated plan. And how has this been created? Are there world leaders out there in this PBR area? Are there features that have been borrowed by Hawaii? How did you reach out to them? Did SEPA get involved? Are there different groups that assisted in making that phone call so you could start to collaborate?
RMI, Rocky Mountain Institute, was absolutely crucial to our proceedings and to assisting us with our analysis internally, to just kind of like even do just fact checks, and also to facilitate a lot of the working groups and just status conferences. They were just a tremendous partner in the process, and they brought with them a wealth of information about other states and also countries that have embarked on this effort. And specifically, I think we started off with looking at Great Britain and the ROII or ROII, I believe, and they had used a TOTEX approach, which is like the total expenditures, but so combining O&M and the capital expenditures. And so we really started, you know, thinking and tinkering around with that idea. And is there any way that we could do that? And then we also consulted with Alberta, the commission up in Alberta, about how they handled sort of end of life of the PBR process, and then also how they handled sort of the financial aspects with dealing with investors that may be kind of spooked by this change, because that's a very real, you know, component of this is, you know, how are investors going to react when you say we're changing the business model of the utility? And so they had some great experience coming from their jurisdiction of how they managed sort of that investor relationship. Of course, New York has always been, you know, a big leader in all sorts of energy related space, and has several mechanisms in place that are PBR based. They haven't taken the full jump yet, though. And Massachusetts is almost in the same boat. So we took the lead. So
Isn't that amazing to think of these different national environments around the world that are contributing ideas and kind of doing a brain meld or sharing of this the strategies to kind of help contribute to the development of, you know, and Hawaii, as you said, is clearly a leader with 100% RPS. And then, okay, well, one last question, if you don't mind here. I'd like to just, you've been very generous with your time, but how does this apply to the gas company, if at all?
It doesn't apply at all. They got a pass on this one. So
very good. Well, Jenny Potter here from Hawaii Public Utilities Commission. It has been a pleasure, and I'm so excited and so encouraged to know that you and the other fine people at the PUC in Hawaii are manning the helm, so to speak, and ushering us into this new period of renewable energy adoption in Hawaii. Thank you for your time today.
it was absolutely my pleasure, Josh. Thank you for having me.